two chairs, so you can stay. Okay. I think you're gonna get a mistake. Okay. Got all set?
Are we recording, Charlotte?
Yes. You're all set. Okay. Good late afternoon or early evening, folks. Call to order the meeting of the Board of Directors of the San Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin Eastern Management Area Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We have a roll call there.
Director Hayden,
Here.
Director Arona,
Here.
Director Hartman,
Here.
Director Marymeet, here, Chair Jones,
Here.
and all five parties present.
Okay, and we have a report that Doug Circle's on his way. Okay, so the public comment. Member of the public may address the board to a non-agenda matter within the board's jurisdiction. The time of public comment allotted for each individual shall not exceed 3 minutes. No action will be taken by the board at this meeting on any public comment item. Do we have any? I see Peg and staff. Nothing there. How about on the TV screen? Is that okay in there?
Nothing's in the chat. No one's raising their hand.
Yeah, maybe just giving a notice that.
If anyone does want to make a public comment online, please raise your hand or unmute. No one.
No one. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to item number 3, consent agenda. It's in the packet, pages 3 to 19. Any comments, board, on the minutes of let's see, February 27th? Any comments for that meeting minute? I have one on page 6. Item 6C II1. You got on that page?
Yep.
Okay. See where it says board action?
Yep.
Okay, so the board provided direction to implement the new fee on July 1st, 2025. To access the fee, I think we meant to say assess, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it needs to be.
Full stop.
I didn't find it. But I'm not that good. Okay,
Yeah, we'll get that corrected.
okay, very good. And let's go to that March 20th, meeting we had with the board and Peg at the workshop. Were there any comments, changes to those things?
I would just flag for the board and the public's attention. Somebody obviously noticed who found the SS. But we've changed the minutes based on board direction to go to action minutes. We've also made recordings of the meetings available through the website, posted through YouTube. And then Charlotte has done a great job of including timestamps, so you can get to the parts of the meeting where you want to review the dialogue. Either, I think some of these are even hyperlinks. They'll take you directly to that part of the meeting, and then some of them are just kind of show you where you need to scroll to.
Okay, yeah, I used a couple of them. I was impressed.
The agenda too has the page numbers. Thank you. That makes it much easier to navigate.
Very good. And then I was talking with Dan earlier, for historical purposes, he keeps a record of so it's all not on YouTube, which could go down, and such have he has it's on a stick drive or somewhere you guys keep.
Yeah, so all the EMA materials, including recordings of the meeting, are on our SharePoint server. So they're locally saved and then they're in the cloud, which is backed up and backed up. So, yeah, we should have good reliability. We have very good reliability for retaining the EMA GSA records.
Okay. You know, since the record show it's 5:06 at Doug's circle. You made it through. Thank you, Mary, for stepping in. Appreciate it. Okay, so
I guess I'll make a motion that we approve the 2 minutes as amended.
do I hear a second?
Second.
Thanks, Elizabeth seconded. All approved?
All in favor?
All
Any opposed? Here, motion passes.
Pat, 5-0. Okay, next we're moving to 3B. Review and consider approval of financial statements and warrants. Dan, do you want to go over any of that?
I mean, these are the standard financial statements that we've presented at all the recent EMA GSA meetings. I think just the one thing that I would point the board and the public to is page 12, the balance sheet. The total liabilities and equity at the bottom of that is 84,000. And I just want to highlight that's, unfortunately, that's the amount of cash that the GSA currently has. And so that comes into play in item 5C with the request for additional funding, or what we're calling seed money from the member agencies. We're obviously going to talk about a revenue generating fee tonight. The other revenue that the GSA has is reimbursements from costs spent towards the Prop 68 grant. So we will continue to see those reimbursements coming in, but there are certain things that aren't grant reimbursable. And then also there's a lag between when costs are incurred and when the grant, we get the money from DWR. So those are just the key drivers for why there's a request for an additional 200,000 from the EMA GSA member agencies. But we can talk about that later on.
Okay. Any questions on any budget so far? None so far. Okay, now the warrant list. If we have 4 bills, any discussion on those bills? Not seeing anything. Can I hear a motion to approve the financial statements and warrant?
So moved.
A
All in
second,
favor?
I guess second.
Oh, sorry. No, we go.
Elizabeth second, okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Yeah, 5-0. Okay, thank you, guys. Okay, informational items, number 4. Go that, you wanna kick that one off, Dan?
Yeah, I just more on the background side of things. We talked about this at previous meetings. With the recension of the executive order that the governor had with respect to well verifications, the EMA GSA does not have a sort of defined role in the well verification approval process, but we have made, an arrangement with County Environmental Health Services that they would provide us with any new well permit applications. And so we didn't have one last month, but we did have one this month. And so that new permit application is included in your agenda packet as has been agreed upon.
Do you have any discussion items on that?
No authority, so.
Yeah.
I've kind of got it. It's good information. I like it. But to really be good for us, it's a little more information would be great for our needs. And I'm just wondering if maybe Dan could talk with public health and just see if we could get a little more information. Do you think that can what I'm talking about, I'll go over it. Okay, here, like on the first page, it talks about construction was checked off. New or replacement, well, to us, it's important, is it a replacement or is it new? That's important to our business. And then, additional, on the second page, there's that little block, well, construction information. They talk about the depth and the bore, but it'd be really nice if we had that added information on what its pump production is, like capacity to do. Kind of like the drill report, you know, that would come eventually with it. That would really help us. And, let's see. I also had, thought this was interesting on page 23, the site information. Are there other wells on the property? And they blocked out, no, but for instance, if yes, how many? They put one replacement. So I was like, wow, that doesn't make sense. They should have checked yes and a replacement. And so that's where I'm sure, oh, okay, this one's a replacement well. I figured it out by looking at the site and looking at their schedule. But I don't know, I just think for our purpose, we had that information, it'd be really good. So I'd like to task Dan to contact them to see if we can work something out, because I really appreciate this stuff. It's good. It gives us at least a location, some idea, but a few other things would be helpful. You got any comment now? It looks like you're giving me a facial gesture.
Oh, no.
Like, what is you doing?
But my understanding is that the environmental health's, application form is actually approved by the board. They took it to the board for approval last time. And so it might be, somewhat, difficult to get them to change it. But it certainly is worth a conversation.
Okay, well, maybe, you know, then you can have that conversation. And then you guys, you know, come back to us and say what it was, then they say, yeah, just bring that to the board. We've got Joan here, she could run it for us probably.
Yes, so have we captured the list of things you would see for improvement? I agree, replacement or new is really significant. But I didn't take notes on what else you were saying.
Oh, it's just like well production, it's what would come off the driller when the driller got through, he'll tell you the production, we got this size pump, this size well, it's at this level. It's just really good information for us running this business here. And I don't think it.
Typically, you don't know the flow until we're done.
Yeah.
The
Pump testing.
right,
This
yeah,
comes first and that comes
Yeah,
later.
there is a well completion report
right.
that's required
And maybe that could be, you know, if we could get that.
after the fact.
Right, yeah, but just be in this permit, when you're done, a copy of it would go to this, you know, the EMA.
I'm trying to think though, I'm not sure whether maybe that was, I don't think the welcome fishermen, did they go to the EMA or go to the state development?
You know, it goes to the state. I'm not sure if the ground is this
Yeah, I
problem.
think it just goes to the state.
So in the past, you know, we would do a well verification, they would make an estimate of how much acre feet they're gonna pump. I don't see that one here. Is that something that you capture else otherwise as part of the county's review process? Or, I mean, I guess I'm trying to ask, are you doing anything that we used to do that we no longer do?
No.
Okay.
So, but I will point out, if I may, Mr. Chair, that, we are later in this meeting, putting together a well registration process. And that might be a good opportunity for this agency to request information about a given well. Something like a fish report or pump test or things like that.
It's the,
There is a section that's intended well use, what the anticipated usage is, and they check more than 10 acre feet. Will it be for more refined figures?
right, yeah, that's pretty
It is.
broad,
Yeah.
more than 10 acre feet, yeah. And good point, Zane, appreciate it.
That's parcel size. What I saw.
No, there's a little box somewhere, it's right there.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Greater than 10. Yeah, so.
Yeah,
you know, if you know, that's.
It could be a
That's
thousand.
good, and if we're having an opinion or not, I mean, we don't have enough information to make that determination.
Does it make sense, Dan?
Yeah, so we can take that, request, we can talk with county environmental health services and county water agency staff and bring something back.
And just tell them, you know, we appreciate everything. This is good stuff. It gets a good location. We know when something's happening. And, but we get a little more, really make our job a little more effective, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, I think. We call him Matt, for lack of a more formal title's point about the well registration ordinance is a good one. I mean, the GSA does have authorities over wells that it can adopt a registration ordinance and request certain information about those wells. And I mean, that may be a more direct, potentially a more effective way of getting this type of information, but we can work with staff and figure
Find out what's the
what we
best
can
way to do it.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Any other input for that? Oh,
If I may,
you may.
do they track what is done with the replaced well? The well that they abandoned or they're not? Is there any place for that? And what purpose for drilling the replacement well? Do they document that? Well,
There wasn't any I didn't see any documents, but that's a good point. And then the abandonment, that's important if they are going to abandon it, that's important, because there's a way that you abandon it, you gotta seal them.
and why? I mean, is it well dry? Is it well, caved in? Is the plan? What is the reason for requesting a replacement?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. So I mean, there is a box for well destruction, you know, or abandonment here, but we did not get a well abandonment permit along with this. And so that could either mean that well is not being abandoned, or maybe we should check with the EHS that we're getting all permits, not just new wells. We're getting abandonment and modification permits. Or again, to Matt's point, a lot of this could get captured in the registration process, because we are asking for all the information on all the wells and their current status. Are they abandoned, or are they inactive?
But this is a good way to flag new ones.
Yep.
Yeah, what is it being duplicated? I mean, I'm not positive in Santa Barbara County, but in most counties, in order to get the permit, it triggers, destruction within 90 days of the completion of the new well.
Okay, for a replacement.
Or replacement. I don't know if you know that matters.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the timing, but yes, and EHS would then inspect the abandonment field.
Right. And actually, they have to inspect, it actually being capped during the process, I think. So I know.
Believe so, I'm not 100% sure their inspection procedure, but I know they're involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, think that while you got a rig out there and the drilling crew, you could drill a new well, make sure it works, and then abandon the old well.
What is it? And the old well is filling with concrete, so it's usually a.
Doesn't require drilling.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Did I miss anybody out there? Nope. Okay. Move on to 5A. Review and provide input on draft EMA GSA budget for 2025-26, on page 25.
Yeah, so item 5A, I mean, I think as many of you know, with your other organizations, we're in budget season, or, you know, maybe even gone through budget season, but, you know, we wanted to, you know, in line with that, put a budget here for the board's review and input. We're not asking for adoption of this budget at this meeting. But we just wanted to provide it, the board can comment or the public can comment. This is not a new budget, just for clarification. This is the same budget that's been presented at the last meeting or the rate study workshop. And I would also, it was pointed out, which is a good point, that, you know, really what's happened is we developed this budget initially for the purposes of informing Sanjay's work and his team. And then sort of handed it off. So their budget is more up to date when you start looking at these out years. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to anything beyond 2025, 2026. You know, things like loan repayment and other things have been modified, as this board knows, and we'll talk about in the other item, that hasn't been all updated within this budget because we've really turned the, you know, the official financial model over to WRE and so on that. But what we, you know, in 2025, you know, fiscal year 2025, 2026, we are going to need to have certain line items approved for spending and so that we don't overspend on certain tasks. And if we need more money, we come back to the board, you know, the standard reasons why you adopt a budget. And so we will need to do that before the end of this fiscal year. And so we just wanted to get a first start at that today.
Any input? Guys?
So I just had some questions in regard to kind of the overhead numbers, the program administration. I know Dan's been doing a big job with everything we've had at the moment, but we had talked about before in some of these out years, 28, 29, and 30 will the same amount of program administration be required. And then we've got, you know, 82,000 for legal and, you know, going to 92,000. So like for this year, the 284,000 in overhead is just those three items, and more, you know, more than half the budget. So. Counting any reports or anything else change like all.
Yeah, so you think maybe there's an opportunity to harvest some cost avoidance there, you know, get those down. I don't know how this compares to WMA, just having, I think I have to look at too. See, you know,
Yeah.
their costs look like. Where is the revenue for pump charges in the out years?
Yeah, again, so this is not the complete financial model of the EMA. That's what Sanjay has in the rate study, and so that's become the official record. Yeah, in hindsight, we should have really just crossed out a bunch of these columns and just showed the fiscal year 25, 26 column to be a little more clear with what we're trying to show and get input on here.
Okay, does Sanjay have an estimate that we'll see at some future point?
Item 5E, yeah, we've got detailed financial models with revenues and other things.
Other questions? Public, staff out there, any questions? Okay. I think, Dan. And let's move to item 5B, received letter from the Con District regarding action plan 68 grant for disbursements on pages 26 and 28.
Yeah, so, Conservation District letter regarding action plan disbursements. I may need some help from the member agency representatives on this one, but I will try to do my best with it. So as I understand it, you know, in development of the action plan, there were certain costs that were contributed by two of the EMA GSA member agencies, the Conservation District and 91. Those costs were then later determined to be eligible for grant reimbursement through the Prop 68 grants, and so those costs were reimbursed. And actually, we've got a figure here, so it's probably just easier to just walk through it. So why don't we do that, Charlotte? But ultimately the request is to get credit for those contribution of those costs in the upcoming EMA GSA $200,000 funding request. So $78,000 roughly was contributed in cost. I'm not sure, but that actual money or in-kind services by in-house legal, I don't know that it matters, but one way or another, this is the estimated cost. Next, please. Conservation District contributed 43,000 of those costs. ID1 contributed 27,000 of those costs for the total, approximately 78,000. Those costs, then next click, were submitted for reimbursement through the Prop 68 grant. So, and next click, DWR wrote a check back to the Conservation District for those eligible costs. But that check and those funds went into an escrow account. It didn't go to the Conservation District. It didn't go to the EMA GSA. It's just sitting in limbo. And so the request, as I understand it, is we go to the next click. The EMA GSA, and the next item is requesting $200,000, so $50,000 from each member agency. Spalding and the Water County Agency would write a check for $50,000 for their portion of that. But these other two agencies, Conservation District 91, have already contributed costs to the action plan that's been reimbursed and sitting in an escrow account, and thus could be credited towards their contributions towards the 200,000. And so from an EMA GSA's perspective, we still get a check for 200,000. So that, helps address the near-term cash flow. And then these agencies are in essence made whole for their financial contributions to the action plan. Is kind of the concept as I understand. And so that's, I think, the request.
How urgent is it to act on it? I mean, how soon do you need solving in the county to write a check?
Urgently. This, I don't think is as urgent, though if we don't go with this approach, then the request would be to Conservation District and 91 to write $50,000 checks instead of the amounts shown here.
Now, the escrow, the money in the escrow, how quick can you get access to that?
Quickly.
Quickly?
I assume it's an ACH transfer or write check,
Chairman Jones, the Conservation District can just transfer the money directly into the EMA's account. As soon as we get concurrence with our approach with having those monies credited back to the Conservation District.
Taylor, how quickly could ID1 have access to do that?
I think in what's being proposed, if there is a request from the EMA this evening, for example, to each of the member agencies for their respective contributions, it looks like ours would be 50,000 minus, what is it up there, Dan, 28?
27.
Yeah,
So,
we can scratch a check any day.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be pretty quick that way. Could you do that?
So the amount of the ID1's share of it is in the same account, so we could transfer that money into the GSA's account at the same time we transfer the Conservation's share into the GSA's account. So it happened seamlessly at the same time. And then the Conservation District, we would cut a check on our next check run.
Right. Yeah,
They balance.
solving quickly. Randy?
So we budgeted, mentioned before, we budgeted expecting it would be more than the 50,000 we gave before. So we have the funds budgeted. As soon as we receive an invoice, we can pretty much get a check cut within a couple of days.
Okay. Any input from the board here? Okay.
We didn't hear from the county.
Yeah.
Back up quickly.
I don't know how quickly we move.
We also budgeted more, so this fiscal year, we have funds, we have easily have $50,000 contributed. It does take our accounting a little bit to process invoices, but we'll be able to expedite it once an invoice comes from GSA.
So, yeah, my simple mind, is and you get all these little things moving differently, cause you know, it's an escrow, and then it's gonna go here, and you don't pay as much. To me, it's just, bear with me, people. I'm 72 years old. I like things very. I like the 50,000 from the 4 agencies. I would like to see checks, straight in. We know what they're for, and that's for 200. And I like to see the escrow money go right to the conservation district for theirs and right to ID1 for theirs, so there's no question. Hey,
I would just comment on that, that maybe I could lean on Bill a little bit to address that as well, but technically, these funds were spent on behalf of the EMA. So they were reimbursed by DWR to, and on behalf of the EMA. I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate to transfer funds from this, what we're calling the escrow account or the suspense account, directly to any other entity other than the EMA. So if you want it done your way that you're describing, Chairman Joe's, it'd be more like we'd each write a check. So the conservation district would write a check for 50, ID1 would write a check for 50. But then the EMA would just turn around and write a check to the conservation district for 43, whatever, 875. And then the ID, it's more paperwork than it's probably worth, than to just use it as a credit.
Okay, so I listened to my staff, so you say that's appropriate? And Bill?
Yeah, just another to add on with what Peter said, this is the reason why we wrote the letter, so that it would document our request and how those funds would be treated and marked in the accounts. So every contribution by any agency to any of these GSAs, all three of them, are very carefully tracked, have been tracked by the Conservation District all along. So we know how much has been contributed by each agency. So this letter is just a request asking for these funds to be just considered our contribution. We did not budget any more than 50,000 for this year. Our budget is much smaller than all the other agencies. So we didn't have the cash. We didn't want to have to draw down our reserves anymore. So we had only put 50 in. And so when this opportunity came up to get the reimbursement and for things that we had already done, we said, hey, this is a good way for us to still contribute, but yet not lay out any more cash than we already have.
Good explanation, like that, Bill. That makes sense. Okay, that put some perspective for me into this. So, okay, any other questions?
Yeah, so
Okay. got it.
and you'll generate the invoices for it. He needs an invoice.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Yes, we can generate an invoice for these amounts and, put some language in there of why that is to help document this, so that, you know, inevitably in 2 years, somebody asks what happened. We got it working.
Because the questions always come up and go, well, I remember this was on the screen and it went this way and that. Okay,
Good photo, I remember, I like it.
yeah, that was. Okay, so we need to receive that.
That or just receive it?
What's that? Just receiving. Yeah, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
We need to have a vote on that, or you just go do it?
I think we're just receiving the letter. And we're gonna receive the request. And why don't we take it with the next item that's, you know, we received the request for the additional 200,000 with the credits, you know, described in the previous item.
Okay, let's then go to 5C again.
All right, so 5C, you know, big surprise, is a request for an additional $2,000 in EMA GSA member agency contributions to the EMA GSA for fiscal year 24-25. And for approval extending the repayment of contributions from the member agencies to the GSA through fiscal years 2027 and 2030. So I think we've talked about the cash flow challenge that we're facing here. That's the reason for the request. The extension of the repayment, that really relates to the next item. You know, I think if you recall the workshop, Sanjay presented several scenarios that included, I don't know, they call it early repayment or repayment as kind of written in the JPA, and then late repayment options for returning the funding back to the member agencies. By extending the repayment, we can keep the rate lower in the initial years, and which, you know, will hopefully help people transition into the fact that they're now having to pay for pumping groundwater. And so that seemed favorable to the board. And so this is just kind of a more kind of a formal request to do what we modeled in the rate study, modeling and what Sanjay will be presenting. But it's something that you know, that we and staff realize we kind of need to make that request. Nobody really here has the authority to say that as potentially as individuals, or this board doesn't have the authority for its member agencies to say.
Right, we
yes.
gotta take it back to our boards. But so you're gonna develop a letter of request or something, send that to the 4 agencies that have their boards give approval for the extension and,
Yeah, we can figure out the mechanism for doing that.
okay, so when do you think that letter would go out?
Was there any sort of formal letter or anything for the initial contribution, or that was just what was identified in the JPA? So that was probably the document that we can bring
They
in.
can just have their.
I was shaking yes to Dan's statement that it was in the JPA. There was
Yeah,
an
we'll look at what the language was in the JPA, and we'll model something, so
Okay.
we can.
So
send
you
it out.
get it out and get it to like. the
Yeah. Can it be an email? Can it be an email? Sorry.
Email, sure.
I don't know how formal we need to be.
Yeah, email would be fine. I'd say we just had our board meeting last,
Letter, no, it needs to be a letter.
we just had our board meeting. So the timeframe, that's why I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, we hopefully, I think we heard from Bill that we should be getting a Prop 68 grant reimbursement for the last quarter here soon, so that will provide some funding. Some agencies, I think, you know, their meeting schedules are different, so may be able to react more quickly. I think maybe some agencies, well, the 200,000 may not require board approval by all the agencies, but the extending the repayment may, so it sort of depends. And the 200,000 is more of an urgent thing. The extending the repayment doesn't need to be, it's not affecting today's cash flow.
I think I'm gonna need for my board a vote on that. But I can tell you they're positive for it. We discussed it and I told them something's gonna be coming. And, you know, they're positive for both items.
Yeah.
And so, but it has to go through my board. I don't have that kind of authority.
Yeah, no, fair enough, understood. Yeah, we're trying to be dynamic as possible. I mean, just for what it's worth, we're holding invoices to the end of the quarter, so the reimbursement cycle for the grant is quicker, you know, from when costs are incurred by the GSA and for when they get reimbursed. And so we're gonna have to, you know, we'll be as dynamic and as flexible as possible to work within all these strengths.
Randy?
I just want to say, from the city's perspective, we would need a formal request to extend the repayment, but the additional 50,000 was budgeted. So there will be no delay with that.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Does that cover that for you then?
That's for me. I mean, if you guys are good in public comment, then I think that's, yeah. Or maybe we already did that, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Anything else?
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
We'll send out, a letter, with both requests.
Okay, go to 5D. Okay, 29 started. Receive and file stigma, groundwater extraction fee, rate study, and consider approval of releasing the Prop 218 notice. Okay, Dan.
Yeah, so without going into all the background, but I'll try to paraphrase it. You know, since September, we've been working with Water Resources Economics, on the rate study. the board's received two presentations, one in December, one in February, and then we, as we all know, we had the rate study public workshop on March 20th. At that workshop, we got direction from the board to move forward with the rate study with a couple of additional items that we've bulleted here. One was to investigate the potential impact and the change in methodology for calculating agricultural groundwater extraction estimates in the 2023 annual report. Second was to expand the analysis by 2 fiscal years to get a better sense for potential rates after the agency repayment and the reserve targets had been met. And then the third item was to move forward with modeling scenario 4, which was a 15% contingency and late payback. So WRE drafted the rate study report that's included in your packet, and Sanjay is going to present on that. And then with staff worked with legal counsel and staff worked on the Prop 218 notice that needs to be released in advance of the rate hearing for the board's consideration, that also included in your agenda packet of attachment B. And then just to kind of explain, what scenario got modeled in the rate study. It really came from board direction. So, as I mentioned earlier, board direction was to evaluate the potential impact of the methodology change. And so we did that. And in that evaluation, it was identified that with the more recent methodology that was adopted in the middle of the 5-year period about calculating groundwater production, which is what we use for calculating and establishing the rate, was identified that the newer methodology potentially produces smaller estimates of agricultural groundwater production because it attempts to more effectively capture the benefit of what we call effective rainfall. So that's rain that falls and is available to meet plant evapotranspiration needs either while it stays in the soil profile. And so that is then groundwater that doesn't need to be pumped to meet those same plant evapotranspiration needs. And so because that new methodology was only used for 23 and 24, but it's the methodology that we expect to use moving forward, it was requested by staff that WRE prepare the rate study report with scenario 3, which included the 25% contingency. So there's just additional protection against revenue shortfalls associated with lower production, groundwater production than would have been estimated with looking at the 5-year, the 2 different methodologies. But it also accounts for variable hydrology, ironically. I know we talked about this, but when it rains, it's great, but we want that to happen. You don't have to pump as much groundwater, so it's great from a hydrologic perspective, but it's a little bit more challenging from a revenue generating perspective. And then potential unanticipated costs. But we want to make it clear that obviously it's the board's decision on what scenario to move forward with. So what's shown in your packet is the 25% contingency scenario. But the board can decide what scenario it wants to move forward with. So that's my long preamble, but really, and I don't know, maybe we want to pause there or questions about that, but then Sanjay has a presentation prepared.
25%, I thought we had approved 15% at the prior meeting.
That's correct, but with the revised estimates, the information they got is showing it is lower than we'll be receiving. That was the new information.
Those are 2 different issues. The contingency is different than the lower amount of water we're receiving. So, yeah, we we recommended 15% contingency and they're coming back at 25.
Due to this new information.
I think we need to hear their recommendation based on the consequence of it getting less,
Yeah.
We should probably, I think what they're saying is we should have a higher contingency percentage just to cover off on the new risk they got.
That's how I understand. Yeah, and Sanjay's gonna give some more information on that.
Ready? Yep. Yeah, stole maybe a little bit of Sanjay's thunder, but you know. Solid. What's that?
Is this a good place for me to be?
Yeah, I don't, I think last time there were some complaints that where the speaker was standing was blocking the TV. Does that work for folks?
Last time I was over there, so I just wanted to hear.
Yeah,
I'm wherever you want me to be.
Yeah.
All right, Chairman, board, staff, and public, my pleasure to be here. We have a presentation, to go over the update, the information that's been provided. During my presentation, if there's any comments, questions you have on each slide, just interrupt me. I can see you, so I can see body language, and we can discuss. Here on the next slide. So our agenda today is to go over the goals of the study, remind ourselves what we're here to do. Talk about how we're going to charge for this, what we call the unit of service, which is the 5-year average. Then look at contingency fund, talking about that and why we're recommending 25% and 15%. Talk about reserves, why we need reserves. Talk about, already mentioned about member agency contribution and requesting a delay in payment associated with that. And then the financial plan and the proposed rates and next steps. So the goal of the study is to develop a funding mechanism to fund and cover the GSA operating costs. And how do we do that? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to understand what's the cost to operate the system for this agency for over 7 years. And that was a request that was given to understand that. We want to also assess what data is readily available during the study. We are moving quickly because we're putting this on our county property roll. So that's one of the things that we're doing. We're being pivoting very quickly with new data we've received. We want to develop 5 years of rates to consider for the board to consider in the Prop 218 notice, and then at the public hearing, the board can consider the adoption of those 5 years. Definitely want to engage the community, be transparent about the study, and the goal is to have a successful implementation of some form of these. So we received direction to use the 5-year average of the groundwater charge to determine how the fee should be assessed. That's shown right over here. EMA staff directed us to use the actual groundwater that occurred last year, the estimate, I should say, not the actual estimate. Now, because one's a 5-year average, one's an estimate of last year, there's going to be a discrepancy, right? I mean, that's the nature of this business, and you can see how it fluctuates quite a bit each year.
So can you go back to that last line? So basically what you're saying, 2024, I see 12,808. And then the 5-year average for some,
Yes, 48,980.
yeah, so that's what you're really, that's the meat of it. We got such a big difference.
Correct. That's the first problem. There's 2 problems. The first problem is that, and that's already a 14% difference. So just off the bat, if we just did that, we'll be 14% under. So we need to have some kind of form of contingency to deal with that risk. The other risk.
Sanjay, I have a question right behind you.
Sorry.
Yeah, somehow I got a draft, which I thought we were gonna go over today, and the numbers that are in my draft, the average is 13,705. So why is there 1,200 difference?
Yeah, so that, I can speak to that. There was an interim draft that was developed as we were working through this issue of the impact of the change of methodology. And that there was a request from Director Circle to see that interim draft, and so we provided that, but that wasn't ultimately the final draft. It includes some of the updated numbers of the methodology, but
But why is it then, if the methodology changed and it's actually the new methodology, why is it showing that ag is pumping more when you said the new methodology showed that ag is pumping less?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so the challenge we're wrestling with is, whatever we do with this report, we wanna make sure it's tied to other official documents. And the pickle that we're in is that we have, what the groundwater, what's the official title of the report, but ground. Sustainability. Yeah, sustainability plan shows we're pumping in there, we wanna tie to that number.
The GSP,
The GFP annual reports, we're not one of the other things, the annual report shows a specific number, and we want to tie to that number. Because we could be accused of being arbitrary with this new number. But we do know that
so the new number, or the 13,000 is accurate, the 14,000 is actually in the
we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if one is maybe more accurate than the other one, but what we do know is we have a published document, the annual report that says a certain number. And from my perspective of just doing these documents and reports, I like to tie these to official documents so that it, hopefully they're considered, but, it's not arbitrary, we can just like randomly pick the number, and, we're picking this number now to deal with this unknown that we're talking about. That's why we want a contingency fund and increase it to 25%. There's a lot of uncertainty here.
And I can't see exactly the copy you have, but I don't really think of any iteration where ag production was higher than what's shown here. That might be the total number.
No, the 13,500 is lower.
Yeah, but she said yes, and that's what the new methodology says, it's lower, but it's not. I think the 13,000 is total, not the ag number.
Right, the difference between the two is 10%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's how we got to 25%. So the 14%, 10%, so it's say 25 for the contingency. The deal with this uncertainty. We go to the next slide, and that's what we're really wrestling with. So there's two challenges we have. The first challenge is the 5-year average and discrepancy from a low year. The second one is the refinement of data that we're working through. And that refinement had some challenges with methodology abstract for ag. And as Dan mentioned, this results in lower estimates for groundwater extraction, accounting for crop demand satisfied by effective precipitation. And so we know there's going to be some, we suspect, or there's going to be a shortfall, 10% as mentioned. So that's why we're recommending a contingency of 25% to deal with these unknowns. Okay, yeah, so we go to the next slide. And, so we're recommending add this contingency to deal with these uncertainties and these risks. We, as I mentioned, as brought up, 2024 is 14% below the 5 years. We have the new information about ag. So with that information, we're suggesting 25%. Just to clarify that, have that in a slide so people can find that later too. The next slide is reserves. So reserves are important because of cash flow. You just saw that just recently. The goal here is to put this charge on the county parcel roll. You'll receive this revenue twice a year. The agency will have costs that will occur more frequently than twice a year. So I suspect maybe sometimes weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. And so it's very typical for agencies that's a charge on the county parcel roll to have reserve that's 50% for the normal standard. And that's what we're recommending here. And then also that contingency as mentioned. So member agency contribution as discussed. Yes.
On reserves. We're just trying to get going here. We don't have actual revenue coming in yet. So is there any, can we hold off on doing some of that and then, just try to recover more of the pump charges in the future that would go to reserves as opposed to
Correct.
incurring that upfront cost. I mean, I like that 15% number. I don't know if I can get it back down there, but,
Yeah.
So that's what we're actually doing. I mean, the goal of the reserves is the target. We're not gonna achieve it the first year, you'll do that in the graph. We actually receive it in, 2027. And that's because of the contribution, paying back the member agencies over an extended period of time. So the goal is not to achieve it the first few years, it's to slowly get there. But you're right, that's what we want to do.
good, then.
Yeah, so, you know, you mentioned we have two problems, and I think we have a third problem also, and that is that, you know, we talked about $37 to $39, and we're going up, or the request is going up, you know, by the 42 and change, and then going off over the 5 years to $50 an acre foot, and I think, well, maybe not a huge amount of money, but significant for the agricultural, you know, somebody who's farming hay, using 5 acre feet of water, seeing that $50 number is going to create more resistance than we might otherwise have. You know, the words on the street about what we talked about at the last meeting. And so, you know, I think, you know, just changing the data and like the 10% change from what we went over on Tuesday this week, you know, and, you know, not coming to our attention until shortly before this meeting, you know, these numbers are going all over the place. And if you take what happened in Los Alamos, we started with a smaller number of people who began to pay it. And then eventually they were in the habit of paying, and it's gone well. I'm concerned that we're going to create resistance in the agricultural community. And so that's why, you know, I think the 15%, I mean, what we agreed to move forward with last time was creating heartburn for me, because I know what's going to happen in the community that needs to pay it. And, you know, that's why when I see the 15% going to 25 without our input, you know, that's concerning. And also the difference between in price is just gonna, you know, create a hardship that I think a smaller number will be adopted better. You know, and I don't think, you know, and then the other thing that's here, we're gonna have this problem consistently. We're gonna have to go up is if we have hay or other crops that need to leave the community because they can't afford to pay for the water. And this is only the pumping charge that we're charging. They still have the production charge and you know, the depreciation on their well and pump. You know, we're going to exceed the value of the crops, which are, you know, already challenged. And so therefore, if they use less water, we'll be back to needing to charge a higher number. And so, I mean, I think it's a very real, you know, concern that I have. And I think we need, you know, and that's why I also think we need to have a lower contingency. We need to start at a more reasonable rate. We need to ask our director to, you know, try and get some cost savings. I certainly hope we're not spending between 82 and 90,000 on legal. And I recognize that that's a risk, but, you know, the difference we're talking about here is not huge in terms of, you know, more conservation and how we manage the basin. You know, and I know that, we actually talked about this last time about looking at, you know, years 4, 5, and 6, and 7. When we get to a steady state, the demand from an administrative standpoint should go down. You know, once people are paying and meters are in place, registration, it should go down. We're not reflecting that. We're having a consistent increase across the budget with inflation. We all know it's higher because we need to repay the upfront money from the agency. I certainly have no problem with. You know, we also talked about whether, you know, a parcel fee, in addition to the pumping fee, number one, you know, could be reviewed and brought back to this group. And from what I understand, it's a parcel fee is legal under the 218 and also under the state audit board. And so, you know, as it goes, if that goes up, I think that should be considered, you know, all parcels are going to benefit from the management of the basin. So, you know, by far, the pumping charge is going to be the largest revenue source we have. But I think rather than simply talking about raising it because we have, you know, contingency concerns, you know, off of that position.
Is our attorney here to once again opine on the parcel fee and whether that's, excuse me.
Yes, Steve is here. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want me to answer that, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, hi, everybody. On the issue of parcel fees, the issue that presents if you're going to levy on a parcel basis is, number one, if the parcels are not producing any groundwater, or if they're deed restricted and they're not allowed to do that, or for some extent, to whatever extent they're not producing groundwater, that really poses a challenge for the agency in terms of defending a possible challenge to the fee. I mean, we've seen it recently in Tehama County, where the county up there was acting as a GSA, and they levied a parcel charge on every parcel greater than 5 acres. It was a pretty minimal charge, but there was landowners who challenged it because they were not getting any benefit from paying it, and it was really a kind of it was eventually the trial court has ruled that it's really a tax and not a fee, and thus it was subject to a two-thirds approval vote by the county people paying it. And parcel charges have been used in this situation, but there has to be a nexus between what they're paying for that parcel charge and what benefit they're receiving. And Director Circle, I see your point about the parcel charge, and I just don't know if that is intended to be levied on properties that are extracting groundwater or all parcels in the agency's service area. Because again, the most kind of direct way to link the fee to the benefit being received is to levy the fee on extraction. It's the cleanest and most defensible formula to levy a fee like this, because we have a direct nexus between the fee that's being levied and the benefit that it is being received by the payor.
So our council also referenced that Tehama County, that was a per acre fee that was deemed that was challenged, and a parcel fee, a minimal parcel fee for the benefit of the total basin was not challenged, and that's what's being discussed in the CMA as a portion of a parcel charge in addition to the pumping charge. And so what we were told, our attorney's on vacation tonight and wasn't available, but he told us that the EMA resistance was the per acre fee.
It was per acre, not per acre fee.
I'm sorry, per acre. No, not per acre, but per acre was what their fee was that was challenged, but that an even parcel fee is legal for, the benefit of managing the total basin. So it could be a token fee that helps with our revenue. Everyone who's taking a shower or cooking or irrigating their landscaping is benefiting from the management of the basin. And then there's also a state, I also sent you the state water code that said that was available also.
Yeah, that was, I think you were referring to 10730 or the Sigma Act. But again, I'll just say that the most conservative and defensible approach to this would be to levy a fee on extraction, because we have a direct nexus. To the extent we're making some indirect benefit argument that the basin's being supported, or these fees are going towards maintaining a healthy basin that could benefit someone in the future should they decide to pump, it becomes more attenuated, and I think it's more open to attack. And I'll just note that the Tehama case is still in the trial court. We don't have an appellate court decision on that yet, but I've talked to the county council in Tehama County and have reviewed the pleadings in that case. And in that situation, the court found that this really was a tax because what was being levied was not based on any benefit being received. So I just don't want this agency to be in that position where has to defend kind of an attenuated benefit as a result of a payment. And I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Could I ask a follow-up
Yeah,
question?
go ahead.
And that is, do you see a difference between a parcel and an acreage fee? Or are they both, too remote?
Well, I guess it would depend, as I'd look at it, was who was being levied, or the parcels that are being levied, if they have a right to pump, or they're pumping, then I think we have a better nexus. But if it's just a parcel that's not pumping, has no facilities to pump, has no intention of pumping, or is deed restricted, that's, and you have to answer the question, what benefit are they getting by paying the parcel fee? Other than, you know, a well-managed basin that perhaps in the future could be an advantage to them. One could make that argument. It's just, we see in the case law of the courts really trying to establish a closer nexus than these indirect benefits.
But Joan's got one more.
Then Mary, well, if we don't want to pay those higher lawyer fees, I think we have to go conservative.
We open ourselves up for absolute lawyering from the folks who would be perceived to not benefit.
Mary?
So I own a house live in Los Olivos, and I get my water from ID1. Grateful for that. I know ID1 pumps out of this basin. And so if I had to pay a $40 per parcel benefit so that I knew that ID1 would be able to continue pumping water to deliver to me, I would think that would be a huge benefit personally.
Okay. Any other?
Yeah, and I think, you know,
I think we risk being perceived as subsidizing the agricultural community if you are just blanket applying a fee to every parcel. That's a tax that they get a benefit from. It is interpreted from my book as total subsidy. We have to map it to where they're pumping.
so, I understand what our lawyer said. I understand that the CMA, which is our sister organization, is gonna take a different path and, you know, they can all do whatever this board decides to do. My goal is to get this solved, passed, and moving forward. I'm concerned that this revised, you know, rate study is gonna create resistance. That's gonna get in the way of us accomplishing our goals, you know, with resistance. And I'm bringing it up because I think it's a very real matter, and whether we have a 15% contingency or whether we try to manage ourselves for these first few years on a tighter budget, and whether we look at these out years as reduced years. I'm not sure what some of each one of those components may help us achieve staying at a slightly lower rate that doesn't create resistance. And that's really my goal. I'm not pushing that we have a rate or anything like that. I just think that the elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. And, you know, there is an economic consequence that's gonna cause people to use less water, and then we have, you know, a separate problem. So, you know, staying somewhere in the middle is important.
So if I may, so the way I look at it from a policy perspective is that you could, do a lower contingency, right? But then there's that risk of not being able to pay back the member agency that contributed. That's really where it's gonna hit, right? And so that would be a delay in paying them back.
But in the out 3 or 4 years, the total cost of operation should go down significantly once we get to a steady state, where we're representing here, that they're actually going up every year, 3%.
And I'm gonna show that in one of the graphs.
Is there room for us to look at the increase percentages per year? Because it's a 20% increase over the 5-year window.
So this,
Those are areas we can also look
Correct, so that's the second option, is actually, these are the maximum that if the board does adopt them in the public hearing. These are the maximum that you could do, so each year you could evaluate whether you do the ceiling or you do something lower. And so you can look at the groundwater pumping that occurred at that, you can decide where you are, and then you can decide, well, we don't need to go all the way up to that number, we can go slightly lower. And so that's a policy, but these are the maximum that you can adopt. So there's two approaches. One is the lower contingency and a little bit more risk on the member agency. The second one is more due diligence of the board, because now the board will have to make sure, can you adopt, can you adopt these, implement the lower rate?
And the,
No, sure, okay, good.
and the Los Alamos, which is a few years ahead of us, has a, I think it's a $55 per acre fee, not per acre foot. And they chose that rate in order to get people paying and get cooperation and compliance from everyone. And, if they have to at some future time, go back with a 218, update, they believe that would be simpler than trying to go with a higher rate. And they've been able to manage their base, and actually, they just actually even reduced it from 55, I think, to 49, because their operating costs were lower than they thought. So, but they didn't try to accomplish everything in one fell swoop.
Okay. Is it possible, if we set the bar higher to 25%, but like the first year, we only go for 15, that's what we actually put in to our fee, but we could go up with, whatever the 25%. I think my numbers are pretty rough, but at 15%, the average per year is $42 an acre foot. With the 25%, it's $45.40 acre foot.
So I have the numbers, maybe go to the next slide. Next two slides, actually. We were talking about the member. So this is the pro forma with the 25% contingency. So the graph on your right, shows the bars are the expenditures. The dotted line is the total expenditure that's occurring. You have different types of expenditure: operating, grant expense, and then the proposed revenue, the member agency payback. The most important was the fund balance, green bars. And that dotted line is the reserve target. As you can see, the reserve target, we're not meeting in the first few years, and it builds up over time, as I mentioned earlier. In 2027, we do meet the reserve targets, and in 2030, we're still meeting the reserve targets. And these show the rate as $41 in 26 fiscal year, and it goes up to $50. And it also shows the revenue that we collect each year. So what one option that the board could do is, as I mentioned, is adopt these rates, and the board could implement a lower rate than $41 this fiscal year, depending on what's happened with the new estimates of the groundwater for ag customers. I would want to know what that is before. I would most likely suggest you go 41 just because to be conservative, and then the out years you may not need to go up those higher rates. You may be able to get 41. Or even potentially lower. But I think you should, just from a conservative perspective, go at 41, but we could evaluate that during the time between the public hearing. I'm gonna go to the next slide. This shows the detailed information. There's a lot of numbers here. Hopefully people have a copy of the presentation in front of them. I'm reading that.
We don't have I don't think we have the PowerPoint.
Yeah, the PowerPoint. Yeah, they just have the rate study report.
And this is not in the report, but this is a 7-year report over 5 years, so we're supposed to do 7 years. So that's what we did here. What we're showing you is the Sigma fees revenues coming in the first line, member contribution coming in at 400,000. We're also showing the grant reimbursement that occurs, some little interest income. So you see the revenues there. Then we show all the different expenses to operate this, which is the internal operating expense. The member payback occurs in 2027, happens over a 4-year period, and it's paid off in 2030 with the interest. There's the legal fees, there's the technical, support services, there's the grant, expense that occurred, and then there's that contingency that was mentioned, of 25%. We have the total expense here, we have the net flow, and I have a circle there, as you can see, hopefully, well, same, but it shows that we're above the reserves targets, because what's happened is that we paid off that internal loan. And last year, it's almost $160,000, so we're net positive of 130,000, a little less than 112,000. And so we're above our reserve targets. So in those out years, I'm not showing a decline, because, you know, it's a bit of a crystal ball, you know, 2031. I'm good, but not that good. So I don't know what's gonna really happen, but if these numbers are correct, we could technically lower the fee by 13% or be $43.50, if this all turns out correct. Which, you know, I suspect a lot of things will be moving around.
I mean, I can't see the numbers from here, but, I'm assuming that the, executive director and the administration and the legal are still on the 3% increase.
Correct.
every year.
Yes, and so what you would do is this is, the way of looking at this is, I like hiking, is like, if you're hiking, you're looking, you have your compass or your GPS system, you're gonna be navigating the ship or this trip. And then you're gonna potentially, in each year, look at where you are on this map and decide, well, do I really need to implement these rates, or can I implement something a little bit lower?
Oh, sorry, we tried to do it. Look at that too long.
We have the flexibility to hold rates steady in some of these future years without obligating, the agency to the 5% increase.
Yes,
Okay,
the frost rating is the maximum.
yes,
You can always go lower. And so that's the approach I would do, because, you know, doing these studies, a lot coming out here, they are expensive. There is also, it takes your time, the board's time to work on this, or there's other, I suspect, issues that you need to deal with. So there's a lot of opportunity costs here. So by doing this, adopting these 5 years, then you can focus on these other issues that you need to deal with the agencies about. And then you can decide whether you can implement those lower rates in the future. Maybe things are better with agriculture, or you can pivot and see where you need to do.
So, yeah, I'm kind of lost here a little bit. So we could, if we went with that scenario number three, the 25%, but we could start out with a lower rate that is suggested in scenario 4, the 15%. We could start out lower.
With that direction from the board.
Right, and we see how the first year goes, and then if it looks like we're okay, then we wouldn't have that rate.
Right.
But we can, because we approved the higher 25. And each year, this board will need to assess if they need to kick it up.
so, okay, that's a good point. At what point can we use reserves, or would we use reserves?
So right now you don't have.
Up the reserve, then we should have more flexibility to have influence, right?
Yeah, so right now you don't have reserves, right?
Fair.
So what we're projecting here, is if you call it plan, is that you would have reserves in 3 years from now. If you don't increase the rate, that means there'll be a delay in that reserve buildup, right? And then and you can decide that, the policy, right? I mean, right now we're saying 50% is being prudent. The board could decide something a bit lower than that. Again, there's that cash flow issue, so, I don't know how much the member agencies want to be a bank, right? It's sort of, that's the cash flow situation that you may encounter in the future. But that's something you can think of as you go through this.
So maybe 15%, as Brad was saying, with the not to exceed 25%, so the flexibility's there.
Yeah.
If we have to do it, but we really want you to
Correct.
sharpen the pencils and try to come in under budget.
Yeah, so I think start the low, but we have the potential, if we have to, we could kick it up, or hopefully we won't.
And I think I still have the same concern that this is what's gonna get published. You know, if we have it going to 50, dollars, and people are trying to understand what the cost of their water is going to be. It's gonna lower their land value, it's gonna lower their opportunity to grow different crops. Because they're gonna go with what's the authority of the board? They're gonna make their decision, what does the future look like? Should I stay in this business when I know it's gonna go up? I mean, there's some, I mean, I've seen this in other, basins, there's changes with, or change in crop mix, we talked about that before, so. So, yeah, support. Myself, but.
We go to the next, so one thing to address that concern, which is really important, for business owners, right, to know in the future, is that maybe the board considers these, fees a bit earlier in the year, such as in February, like what the new rate will be, so that's something to think about, so that gives a little bit more hindsight to crop owners. When they decide how to do it.
So are you saying give the bad news earlier? Is that what I heard?
Or good news, because by then what the estimated water use is, right? I don't know when you know the estimated water use for the prior year.
January, February-ish.
Okay, so that's when you would, yeah,
Pretty
March,
year,
yeah. You could tell.
No.
So the next slide is, we want this report to be received by the board, we want it to be available to the public. So that people have time to read it and look at it and ask questions, we encourage that. And then we would like to send out the Prop 218 notice, so, we do want to receive direction from the board in the sense of, do we stay with this ship, this report of 25% contingency? And navigate that way, or if there's some suggested changes, then I'd like to hear that, because I want to have that, whatever that is, that the Prop 218 and the report should mirror each other. The public hearing is where the board would consider the adoption, but as mentioned, the board could implement at that meeting a lower rate. I've seen that many times before. You adopt something, but you implement something lower to deal with those concerns that you just brought up.
Yeah,
How much do the member agencies want to be a bank?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think that is the question you're asking us, if we want to reduce the reserve
Yeah,
and the rate.
that's the buffer would be, yeah. The member agencies want to keep fronting money until they get this wheels on the ground and going. And, my agency was okay with extending the time frame because they see the importance to get it going. But yeah, I didn't, felt like 20 years.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what Doug's saying. I don't want to scare anybody away, I don't want to, but yeah. We got to do this. It's not like these members here said, yeah, we came up with the idea. We didn't come up with the idea. We're implementing our direction from what the state told us to do. If we can't put something together that runs, we haven't done our job. And that's a balance act,
Well, we're trying to cover a high budget. And, with a high fee that causes the agriculture to change its crop mix or reduce its water usage, we're gonna be back here anyway to raise the fee because we have less pumped acre feet to support the future. It's sort of a vicious circle. We chase them away, they're not gonna come back, so it's a very real concern as far as I'm.
Right, no, it's real.
Can I ask a question, Sanjay? Where are our rates relative to, other agencies in Southern California?
I've seen them all over the map, and some of the challenges is also how the fees are assessed. With the neighboring three, then I know one has revised their.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can speak to it, but the WMA rate is, I think, is quite a bit lower, associated with a lower budget and a larger pool of pumpers to pump from. EMA rate, as I understand it, if it was gonna be purely volumetric groundwater pumping, would be up in the $80 or $90. But they're looking at more of a hybrid approach. My understanding is there would be a partial and a volumetric component. Half Basin is, and it's not adopted, but the rates that I've seen most recently published is $55 an acre foot.
The WMA is $12 a foot, right?
Yeah.
50.
An acre.
And
And how many acres do they have compared to ours? Not
So they're roughly
double.
25,000 acre feet, I believe. Yeah, Bill, did you have a clarifying?
Yeah, I just heard it a couple times. The CMA is not considering a parcel fee in combination with a volumetric fee. It's considering a per acre fee in combination with a volumetric fee. So this is to clarify that.
That's a big deal right there.
Yeah.
Wow, that's huge.
Well, there's not as much water to divide costs by, and that's,
Yeah, that's a lot of acres over there.
a couple other data points in our climate zone are 55, actually what San Antonio Basin is, and then Santa Maria, there's not a pump charge currently, so they're not being charged. Those are the competing crops. You know, in the 55, you're not per acre foot, but one charge per acre.
I don't think it justified that, I'll use the legal term, how is that a nexus to actuals, the utilization? I know it feels like it. It's not, there's no relationship, just how many acres do we have?
That's what their board has chosen at this time.
Well, and may speak in the form, but I think that they took a different approach. I think it's an assessment, you know, that has a different threshold to clear. But that's a legal mechanism to apply a fee for a specific purpose.
It's not a 218.
It is.
Maybe I should, Steve, I don't know, I don't know that you have any specific San Antonio Basin knowledge, but I thought it was a different approach.
I don't know, but if it is an assessment, then it is a different approach under the Constitution. There's a different section of the Constitution that governs the procedures for levying an assessment. Of course, an assessment is a different animal than a tax or a charge or fee. I look at it as there's really three lanes created in the Constitution. One is for taxes, which of course provide a kind of a general wide social benefit of some kind, versus an assessment that's very specific for direct benefits conferred upon the payers of who receive the benefit. Like the classic one is a lighting improvement district, for example. And then the third lane would be where we are with a fee or charge. But I don't know what San Antonio is doing, but if they are levying an assessment, that's a different procedure where you have to mail out ballots to all the potential payors of the assessment. It's a different animal than what we're dealing with.
Just according to their website, I mean, they characterize their fee as an assessment.
What are we thinking?
Yeah, what do you think?
I just, one thing to point out, and this is not gonna help you, but but if you see that date on the second line, April 25th, that's next week. So, unfortunately, we need input if we're gonna stay on this path, this track that we've been working really hard to be on, which is to get on the county tax roll for next month.
So we haven't time to be creative, is what you're saying.
No. Yeah, I mean, if
It needs to be creative.
So what do we have to play with here? I mean, in 15, 20, 25, staff has looked at this. If we wanna get the payback for the agencies, then we really need to go with the 25. Is that correct?
Right.
We might We might pull that down to 20 if we've got, but how do we know that? And we don't really have the time to go back. I really am amazed that we've kept to this timeline. And I'm really committed, given how hard staff has worked, to try to keep to that, because I think that job's so much easier going forward to just have that on the tax rolls and not have to deal with trying to collect money ourselves. That to me is really a hard road to go.
You opened up the 20%. When you did the table last time, you had 20% as a possible choice. Is that something that we could look at again, just to see how big the gap is from, the opening says, I heard good arguments as to not investing in reserves right up front. And so maybe we could bridge the gap and get to something that's more palatable. Otherwise, we're gonna lose ag and they're gonna not gonna pump, they're not gonna grow, and so we're gonna do more harm than good.
Chad, do you have the fire?
We're working on it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, you can definitely, that's a board direction, right? Or we take a, use the 20% contingency, and we can, proceed with updating the report to reflect that. The probability for notice would be that, and yeah, nothing, we can just do that.
Hager's got a question.
If you don't mind, please, the board, while Dan and Charlotte are looking for the information, I have those 4 scenarios from the March 20th presentation. Scenario 2 is the 20% contingency in a late payback, which I think we paid that road tonight. So instead of starting on $41 an acre foot, you'd start out at $39.50 an acre foot. So you're $1.50 different. And you end at $48.10 an acre foot in fiscal year 2030 under the 20% contingency, as opposed to ending at $50 an acre foot. So you're $1.90 less expensive with the 20% contingency. Whether that at the end of the day amounts to the make or break of a particular type of agricultural operation, I really can't opine on, but it seems like the numbers are relatively close.
What, Peter, on that one, what did you say was the late payment schedule? Was that another
Yep.
4 years? I can't remember.
It's 27 through 30, correct, fiscal years 27 through 30.
And it's on the,
But they would
Right.
still get the interest over that
Right.
yeah,
period of time.
right. The only thing that's different is the contingency. Right, so it is, presentation that shows some better.
Yeah, I mean, that's one situation. My point is, I said it twice. Now, 2 is that I'm going to avoid resistance to walk between units and,
Right.
you know, number 1, and number 2, shocking people that it's going to be up. They're going to look at what's the worst case scenario for me. You know, it's a challenging time right now for ag, and so I completely agree that, you know, the sticker shock is important.
Yeah, I don't know, is there gonna be any marketing of this to the public or to those ag units to be paying these rates so that you can include comparative basins? You can throw in a few worst cases like or San Diego County, where I think we heard Bill at the Water Institute, they were $400 an acre foot or something. They're paying for it right now. So I mean, there's worse scenarios out there. that-
Right, in San Diego, the avocado business is left, and the trees are still standing dead.
Yeah.
Because of the water situation. I don't know if that's a good example of why.
Well, no,
Again,
again,
there's a different circumstance there. They don't have the groundwater resource like that. The imported water became more expensive and actually
and they got locked into that agreement.
Yeah, they're locked into the agreement that ran.
Yeah.
But that's an example of water costs going up in agricultural regions.
Right.
And so,
Okay, so where we're at now, it sounds like we could go with the 20 and a long payback. That's in the stuff we disclosed, so that wouldn't be a problem.
Well, the only caveat is we're working on the ag refinement numbers. And if it is lower by 10%, then off the bat, you know, we would be below the revenue that we need, would be under collecting the revenue that we're projecting.
There's, I would say, having spent quite a bit of time with those numbers, they're our best guess at what we think we can need. I can't say that these are exactly the costs that we're gonna need. I can't say that these are exactly the revenues. I mean, we're gonna have to deal with some uncertainty in this, and so I think there are ways to measure it. We do have, hopefully legal isn't that high, hopefully admin isn't that high in future years. I guess I'm trying to say, I think a 20% conclusion is something we could work within.
Your comments resonate, but we're not, right, they're locked into that agreement or something like that. We can still come back and change all
Right,
this.
but what's the headline's going to be, what our maximum capacity, that's what's gonna get published, that's what's gonna be at the, I would think that's what's gonna be at the workshop in June, is not what we might do, but what we have the authority.
Right.
I think, well, so speaking of messaging, how we messaging and marketing this, one way that we can position is we are a startup and we're estimating. So we have the right tune. And if they understand that we are highly sensitive to the impact of financial impact, because regardless, I just mentioned that these numbers are psychologically better, but they get plugged into a spreadsheet no matter what. So they still have to, we're sensitive to the fact that there's impact.
The worst case scenario. If we're underestimating water use and so we don't have a 25% contingency, would we have to go for another 218 or what?
Yeah, I think Sanjay has mentioned it, some of the knobs we can turn. One is, a 20 or 15% contingencies helps address that shortfall. It's like you use that contingency to meet your expenses for that year, not building reserves, but you're still covering your costs. So it takes longer to build to that reserve target. So that's one option. It's not 50% operating costs in 5 years, it's in 7 years.
Or we can give you that management challenge to go realize.
Yeah, the other option is you say, well, we're gonna adopt a budget that says your legal is this and then your other budget this, and you're gonna have to trim your level of service and stay within their budgets. And so, the other option is the payback. You could consider, could be request to extend it out even further, so that it doesn't hit those, you're not seeing those as high of expenses in 27, 28. There's go well back to another Prop 218, there are a number of options for how you could address that potential shortfall.
But, yeah, like you mentioned, instead of going to that 218 where you're going for more money, we could go back to our age fees and if we give more time, we can pay back. That's something I think is doable from my standpoint. I don't know what the other age. Randy, I'm sorry, you had your hand
I
up.
just had a question.
Go ahead.
Typical ag pumps how many acre feet a year? Or maybe kind of on the high side. What do you think that number is, 200?
Yeah, there are some, that's totally up, gut feel. We have a lot of small ag, farms, so that this is gonna be a, big change for them.
Right.
And, some of them may be 100 or 75, or 50, a lot of small ones that are probably, not a huge amount over 200. But I'm just going from the.
Right, so I guess really just doing the quick math. $1.50 an acre foot times 200 is $300 a year is what we're talking about to the most prolific, one of the more prolific. I guess that's kind of that's not counting the $38 or $40 in front of that. I'm just talking about the difference that we're talking about in cost.
Right. So I think, the example of alfalfa, which is grown here, which is 5 acre feet. If it's $50, that's $250, an acre. That's plus your pumping and depreciation charges. So, it's an incremental increase. We're only concentrating on the $1.50, but it's the total, that is where the impact is.
But that, just in perspective, that's why I'm trying to get ahead. We're talking about $300 a year. Yeah, the overall amount is significant, but the difference in 15 to 20 to 25% really isn't that much. and to give some assurances that we're not gonna have a deficit, because I mean, one of the whole reasons from my perspective and understanding, one of the whole reasons for this is so that the member agencies don't have to come in and help bail out. And if we go on the lower end and something happens where the consumption is less then the member agencies are gonna have to pony up some money. And then you're end up in that situation where you've got more money to pay back later on. And they're just kind of continuing to chase that versus dealing with it a little more upfront. And at the end of it, based on the projections, that if I understood Sanjay correctly, you could see that number starting to go down in 5 years versus continuing to go up.
Only if we work on the budget.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing everything what you're saying, and I understand the 25% and needing to say the top so that you don't have to do a 218. The whole point of SGMA is to reduce pumping and get this basin in a sustainable level. And so I hope you're committed to being fiscally responsible and realize that if the budget stays up, the pumping fees are gonna stay way, way up. So after year 2, year 3, I hope you come back to the budget and chop it in half, honestly, because otherwise there's gonna be a lot of unintended consequences where mom and pop is gonna be gone and you're gonna get corporate ag in here. And you're not gonna want that. We don't want Brimwell. And we don't want Old House.
No.
So there's many generations of ag here that could go out of business. Yes, sir. So I understand what you're doing now, but I hope you really are committed to the fact that this is a community based on ag. People move here because they want their open spaces. That's ag, okay? That they don't, I mean, that's the benefit, right? You all live here and you have your open spaces that's managed by ag. Right? It feeds your economy, it employs people. So the fact that they're not getting a benefit, okay. But I hope you hear what I'm saying, that you really need to look at your finances. And year 1, year 2, I understand why it's high. Year 3, 4, 5, I hope you take a red pen. Get that.
I agree with everything very good.
Yeah. Good point. So, okay, where are we at for now with different numbers and we don't want to scare ag away. You know, we want to keep our environment the way it is. That's why we moved here. Hey,
Just maybe a little bit more context actually, because I've been just for this type of purpose, listening into the WMA meetings and the CMA meetings, and I think we might all agree that trying to specifically compare our pump charge to other areas, whether in this basin or other areas of the state, it's really challenging because you get into that whole denominator and numerator issue. You know, are they building projects somewhere and therefore their budget's big, or is their production 15,000 versus 25,000, or in the little CMA like 2,200? So it's really challenging to make direct comparisons, but for purposes of our basin, to Doug's point, I mean, in the WMA, I think it was mentioned a moment ago, I think right now they're landing on $15 an acre foot. I think there was some recognition that they might have somewhat of an artificially low budget starting out. I'm hopeful that they can make it on what they have. But you have to consider too, that a given farmer down there is gonna pay $15 an acre foot to the GSA, but also currently $15.70 to the conservation district for zone B production. So you add those together, and a given pumper down there is at $31 an acre foot. In the CMA, even though they've gone with this combination, and there's lots to say about the acreage charge or a parcel charge and how they discuss that there, but setting all of that aside, where they've landed right now in trying to divvy up the fairness of how much revenue is raised from pumpers versus non-pumpers, what they adopted last Friday as a pump charge component of their overall revenue generating is $63 an acre foot. So if nothing less, we're comfortably in the middle. where you are, just to try to give some context and, you know, I can't begin to appreciate the real economic factors that you're talking about, Doug, from the ag community, but from an overall perspective, I mean, municipals are gonna pay this amount too, and be passing that along to ratepayers, who receive a diversified supply from a supplier like ID1 of the city, but we're somewhere in the middle-ish. If that provides any help.
That helps.
Good. Thanks, Mayor. Okay. Looks like it's gotta make the decision here, troops. Do we,
I'll sort of say what I'm thinking as a opener. I feel like the 20% is a good. And we still have some leverage to pull. So, and we take advantage of a late payable if we can get the supporting agencies to agree to that. The other levers are still, we can relook at our budget, look at the numbers that are in our budgets on the out years. We can relook at the annual increases year over year. It's fixed at 5%. And we, you know, so I think we can, are we obligated to a number of our reserves? Okay, so there's things that we can do. I think we have to come out of the gate firm, but attentive. Because I think if we're not firm, it might be perceived as we haven't done it. We're firm, but we've listened to all the consulting, we've reviewed the budget a couple of times. And we know what we need to pay attention to for the next couple of years.
good point.
So what rates are we supporting?
That's the third, that what I just suggested was like, heard it, they didn't see it yet. It's the third scenario two is third.
Yeah, so 39
Yeah,
and 50.
50.
Yeah.
I'm topping out at 48.10. That's.
Anything,
I'm open for discussion.
Well, it's better than what's proposed on, you know, on schedule 4 in our packet. You know, I still think the high end of that is going to create resistance. And I think the high end of it, you know, $284,000 is legal administration and director. That's more than half the budget. And, you know, when we get out to those years where people are gonna be paying, we have the meters and we have the registration in place. You know, are we sure that we wanna go tell people it's gonna be, you know, 48 when it seems to me like it's gonna be a much smaller job to manage when we get to that point, and we're, you know, I mean, this has 3% increases for everything, you know, every year, and
So we gotta do some payback.
in addition to the payback's in there, and the payback has an increase of 3, I have several copies of this over the last week, but as I understand it, the payback has a 3% interest rate. Plus, the whole budget has a 3% inflation increase. So, you know, and you say it's going to go down in these out years, which is where we get to the higher rate that we have to sell.
Right, and yet we're not seeing an appreciable, reduction in costs. I mean, we're kind of in the development phase for the next couple of years, but then we go into sustainment.
Right.
So you would expect to see those admin costs come way down. It's just less work to be done during that time period, like you're saying.
Unless we're in overdraft, unless we're in trouble.
But we have levers to pull if that's the case.
And, yeah, we're gonna have to really manage tightly, you know. Keep our costs endless, you know, we don't have to raise them at the, what is projected. You know, we could, maybe we keep our legal barriers, you know, that will save a lot of money. And then, yeah, the reserves, maybe we hold off reserves and maybe we need to loan the payback. We all have that ability to make those decisions in years out. So,
I think the small payback still has a possibility. Just, I think there's, so to your point, to everybody's point, that 4810 is realistic, but worst case, right?
Yeah, not to exceed.
And I think that goes to how we market this, how we educate, how we explain. And I appreciate that the numbers, but I thought Peter's analysis was really helpful. And how we tee this up and explain to people, if we just put the numbers out there, everybody's gonna think, this is cast in stone. But I think, so I'd like to talk about what we're gonna do and explain this to people so that I feel more comfort that we can actually succeed.
well, that kind of goes into that notice that's gonna go out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's gonna, you need some explanation.
Is the notice showing the data, or is the notice really, meant to notice the public hearing?
I mean, the notice includes at a high level a description of, what the fee is, what it's for, what the proposed fee schedule is, how that was calculated, but in terms of showing the numbers, I mean, it's just the on the table here. It doesn't have all of this, which, I mean, but the notice is a legal requirement, what we have to do this. And, our workshop, I mean, those are probably better venues for trying to get the word out.
We need to think in terms of a press release and go to GPT chat and say, how do you make this understandable?
That's great, is it palatable?
Well, not
Yeah.
just palatable, but at least understandable. I mean, we've had to wrestle with this. It takes a lot. So I think it's incumbent upon us to try to explain, in 7 easy points where we are.
Ask a question. So in the 218, it gives the first year's rate or it gives all 5 years?
All 5 years.
Because that authorizes us not to have to go through the
Yeah.
process.
Okay, sure. Look like a narrow line there.
Yeah. I mean, so, yeah, we've done our outreach, we had the rate setting workshop, we've got more interest than we see down a typical meeting. Send out these notices, we might start attracting some more attention, and so, I mean, these meetings, more workshops, I mean, those are ways that we can try to spread the news. The follow-up notices.
But I think something in writing that's very clear and
Yeah.
like the flow chart that you started out with, something that, I mean, it doesn't have to be PowerPoint, but just something that people can, the state's requirements and, what we've gone through and what we're planning, and that this process requires us to go at the highest, but we're committed to managing with a sharp pencil.
Yeah, I mean, I think the notice really, has the state requirements and all that stuff, but it's buried in prose
Put
and.
that in GPT chat and say to do it in, 400 words. See what it comes up with. I mean, we have to make it so people can digest it, and that, it's taken us all this to figure it out.
It's a lot, and then also, too, that maybe how, I noticed you have the EMA website in this notice. And if we had something like for any questions, need more, they could contact you, and you could, explain more, because I expect people are gonna wanna talk, they're gonna ask questions, I got notes all over on my stuff. And, if we could be more available somehow, to answer those immediate questions. And you will probably answer some folks, maybe positive, maybe negative, but it'll help spin it out and then, hopefully, solve the issues for the people.
I mean, I don't want to call the question, but I mean, Dan, are you looking for a motion to approve releasing the Prop 218 notices tonight?
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
a scenario 2 stipulation and a lot of the other good suggestions that we had from both public and other board members on how to manage the costs going forward and say as concisely as possible in ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's, we do need that motion. Yeah, and it's good input. We can add some information about, the EMA website more. Right now, it's just reference for the rate study report, but, we can say for more information, please visit the website, contact EMA@water.org. So we can definitely add that in. A couple other things I would like to cover with the board specific to the Prop 218 notice is one of the things we've had discussions with the staff level is adding a Spanish translation version. I think we kind of settled on, let's put some language in there in Spanish, so that if you want a Spanish version, then it's available on the website, and then also we'll have hard copies of the local, I think it's the Solvang library, so people can get those there, so that covers that. And then also there's, there may be some minor tweaks that we want to make to provide flexibility. It was raised that, right now we say county tax roll. What if, unfortunately, something comes up, we don't make the tax roll, we do have to do direct bill, maybe tweaking the language just so we have that flexibility. And so we'd like to retain some of that authority to work through this. And it sounds like, Director Hartman is advocating for maybe an executive summary section of the notice, with the talking points. I think that's something we can put together, ChatGPT can help us with that. And just to try to make it a little more accessible for the public. And so, yeah, we can definitely incorporate that.
And then I don't know if this would be a positive, but if we don't get it done, it's still gonna happen, whether, all of our effort here, something's gonna happen from the
Yes,
state level.
and that's a good point, and it's a great summary.
Question, gentlemen, when you're,
Yeah, okay.
did you want your, assessment to go out with the 218, or did you want it available separate through marketing? I was part of that.
Yeah, I'm open. I just think that we need to have things in writing that are simpler. And I don't know whether it be press release, whether it goes out with the notice, whether it's on our website. I guess it can depend on how proud we are of what we're able to summarize. But I think it's the piece that's gonna make the case for this. Nobody's gonna read all that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the concept of a press release is a little attractive to me. I mean, this is the legal notice. This needs to go out
Yeah.
next Friday.
Yeah.
It needs to get to the printer by Wednesday. We do not have time to make
Got it.
changes, but we could then follow that with, hey, press release, hey, you should have received your Prop 218 notice from the EMA GSA. Here's what it's all about. Here's where you can get more information. And that could go in the paper, it could go to our distribution list, it could go, the local agricultural association.
Farm Bureau and
So I think that would help us stay on path with the legal requirements of what we need to get done, but then also address the concerns that you've.
And I thought what Peter set out, kind of putting it in the middle, it was helpful to me.
Yeah, we can look at the helpful that have comps.
And Dan, one idea, if I could, I think we could readily generate, a set of FAQs for the website that could perhaps address some of the issues that are being raised about why, why are we doing this, why we have to do it, or if we don't do it, then the state does it. I mean, that type of thing.
Yeah,
Good idea.
I like that. That's because that's the driver. That's what's driving, that's why we're here. You know,
Yeah, I think we have a lot of that information in the PowerPoint from the workshop, that we should distill it down, right? There's a lot of other stuff in there
it's
too.
not like these members here, we just wanted to create, you know.
A job for ourselves.
Yeah.
So not things this way.
Okay, so that all sounded good. So we're gonna go with the 20% 4-year?
I'm willing to do that.
Okay.
I think it's fair.
Done, think, gun the boat will sell with it or not?
Yeah. Give me that thought. I mean, you guys can do, you only need 80% votes.
Right.
We would sure like it to be unanimous.
Yeah.
We made, I mean, your arguments have fully given my own, I'd be 25, but I want to be responsive.
Yeah, well, I'll support the 20%.
I hear a motion.
I think I made that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I seconded and we.
Got a second?
All that down.
You want a roll call vote or just all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. We're good with that. Thank you, everybody. That was.
Yeah, this is, that's how we want to have this done.
It was good. Everybody, you guys too, great comments. Appreciate it. And council, I appreciate what they said.
Even though we don't like to pay you.
Now we're gonna go to E, is that where we're at?
Yep.
Okay. The ordinance.
Yeah, so we have, for item E, a proposed EMA GSA well registration ordinance. This, in structure and content, is very similar to what we presented. I believe it was at the January meeting, when we presented a draft registration and metering ordinance. We thought it would be helpful to take this stepwise. Start with the registration ordinance. We incorporated input from the board and the CAG. Most of that actually was on the metering ordinance, so there are not a lot of significant changes with this ordinance. I think just a couple of things. We took out some references to this being part of a larger bylaws or other document, because we haven't adopted bylaws for the GSA yet. And we modified the language a little bit to allow some flexibility for what format the inventory ultimately comes in. One of the things we're evaluating at staff level is, I'd like to get away from, thousands of pieces of paper with handwritten stuff on it, and maybe move towards some sort of self-registration on like web platforms or something. I know the district is working on a platform for well registration type information. There are a number of industry available platforms that are in use in other basins that, look pretty effective or look pretty useful and are relatively cost effective. And so we want to maintain that flexibility. But at its core, we need to get information about the wells that are in the basin. Are they active? Are they abandoned? And then that's an incredibly useful tool that we can use for future management of the basin. So we presented to the board's approval consideration.
Do you use the San Antonio Basin template to start with?
Yeah. So we started with, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel here, so we started with the San Antonio Basin and referenced a couple of other ordinances.
So this also went out with manual registration document. Did they share that with you?
They have made that available to us, yeah.
Our experience there was that they had both online and the manual with the phone number for someone to help people fill it out. Because it runs the gamut of people who understand what you're asking and can do it quite simply, to others that, are not they know they have a well, but that's about all they know, and so it does take some handholding.
Yeah.
So that was the success that they had.
Yeah, we got a lot of good input from Donna and Kevin and Stephanie on how their process went. And so, yeah, we would look to leverage that their experiences, lessons learned in our rollout of a very similar program.
All four of our staff have looked at this and they're good with it. Legal's looked at it too and they're good with it.
Yeah, so it's been shared with all the folks.
Speak up if you're not good with it.
No, Dan's been doing a good job getting with staff. He really has the last month. He's had to listen to me. So, good job. You guys have any comments to our public? Yes.
I just wanted to say, it sounded like, there goes that there was some information that you were maybe hoping to get. And if there was something specific, now might be the time to add it to the list, because we're asking all well owners to provide certain information. So if there was, I think maybe most of the things you were looking for are already on this list, but if there was something that stands out, you might want to direct staff to add it.
But was it the minutes? I wanted to make certain, would those wells be included?
We still want the registration of things, right?
Yeah, so the way this is written, it includes all groundwater extraction facilities except river extractors, but including de minimis extractors.
And I think the data page that goes with this asks for the size of the well and the field.
Yeah, so in page 59 of your packet is a general list of all the type of information that's requested on the well as part of the registration. And then, yeah, we could include a more form that people can then fill in this information while they're performing the registration. But I think some of Director Joseph's points, I mean, there's a question about annual water use information and purposes of that water use. I don't know if production capacity is explicitly included, so that could be an addition. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to just say estimated production capacity and then, yeah.
So the other question that we had in San Antonio was many people did not know where to find their state well number, and so ultimately we ended up providing the contact number for that.
Yeah,
And then there are enough older wells that don't have a state well number, so.
yeah. Yeah, that's good input.
I do notice that, this list, several lawyer added that this list does not limit what could be put on the registration form. So you can always add, staff can always add something to it.
At all caps.
Mary's got
Go ahead, Mary.
Someone who's gonna have to fill this out for probably the 10 wells that we have, the easier and simpler it is, the better. So we're not asking for too many crazy superfluous items, for me would be great.
So one other point that you just caused me to remember is that there were some people who had challenges giving us the information, and we took what we could get. And we didn't chase down, every single last thing if they couldn't find it, because some people were out of town and tried to comply and didn't have everything, but we felt it was more important to know they existed with what information was provided, so that's what we considered, especially for our first compliance.
Do you go around again and catch it up, or is it important to have it complete at some point?
Yeah, I don't recall, I don't know, Mary, if you recall from those meetings, but
I'm sorry, I missed the question. What was that?
When they had some gaps in the data in San Antonio, did they go back for a second time? I'm not, we can find out. We haven't been contacted. I mean, obviously, if we don't have the key information, that's what I can ask it, but, the long list of items that people may not know, and we, you know, 80-20 rule.
Go ahead.
The name for people using less than 2 acre-feet per year, what is this name? Those people, would it be a benefit to the board, the EMA, and to them to have some reference to somebody who could gather that information for them? A consultant, because I would expect many people that I know that have just a well that's been on the property forever have no clue about its depth. They hardly use it, they use it periodically. So I'm just suggesting, if you want this information and you hope to have it to be somewhat accurate, that you have a reference to somebody who could help them.
Yeah, I think Bill may have some information on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just gonna say, you know, the district has a lot of experience with local wells. Since 1979, we've had a well registration program. And we've been looking at our records recently, and, you know, they're sort of like what Director Circle has said, is you don't have them all complete because people just don't know. And they may be willing to give you the information, but the information is lost and the well's just out there and they have no idea. So you may have to just couch your expectations on what you're gonna get from most people, especially a lot of these wells in this valley were put in the 50s and 60s. So, I mean, mostly it exceeds the generational knowledge of a lot of the owners, so. Thank
What
you.
do we really need?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it comes down, you know, how and what are we trying to manage? I mean, I think the first thing we need to know is who has wells. And so, you know, and anything we can give you on that would be better, but,
Who has wells that are pumping?
and yeah, who has wells that are pumping? You know, developing that contact list so that if the board wants to move forward with a metering ordinance, we now know, okay, you have a well. Now you should have a meter on your well. And so it, you know, a lot of this other information I think is useful. It can support technical studies, but is it critical for what we're trying to do today that we have for every well? Probably not. But I think try to gather as much information as we can. And then if we determine for some specific technical initiative or management initiative, we need more, then we can focus on that.
I think it's a really great suggestion that if we can find a couple of people who could be consultants to help people who need that kind of help to go find their well and find the details would be helpful. But I agree, this is the first step, and we're gonna be back on their doorstep once we now know who they are and where they are to talk about meters and, you know, the future point. And so, you know, we could ask for gaps at that time too.
Yeah, 'cause that'd be good, cause you know, the public, they know what's happening. They know, okay, you know my well, they're gonna be back and it's gonna be the meter. And it's not gonna be shocking to them, but we need to work with them the best.
I kind of agree with Mary that you see this big, long form that's very intimidating and just kind of give up with it before you even start. So, you know, if we could make it as simple as possible.
You know, then you had like fill in like for certain things, you could have this, or is it this, or is it that?
Duplicate as well, submitted in the web-based thing, so that it just auto-populates and they go in and make the corrections for the second well, so it makes it easier to put it online.
And then some examples, of things, some that have been filled out, you know. The amendments user, 50 acre type users, 100 acre.
Yeah, and we haven't dug into this in a lot of detail, but I mean, there are a number of well databases out there, information. Doug's pointed us to some regional board ones, there's the state, there's county EHS. I mean, there may be ways to pre-populate a lot of this stuff. I mean, where we have well completion reports, that checks a lot of these boxes, but probably some of the more intimidating boxes for the non groundwater technical person. So we can look to leverage that existing data set and make it easier.
Are you looking for a motion to, approve the, well registration ordinance?
Review and consider adoption. Yep, we are.
Okay, so moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Seconded by Doug, guys, fine. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay. Here, okay, item 6. Consider
They're busy enough.
date and time for next regular special meeting, May 22nd.
Yeah, that would be great if we could, for the first time in a while, use our regularly scheduled meeting date at noon time and 4 p.m.
We go with 4 p.m.
Yep.
Okay, everybody's good on that. Future agenda items, I heard John said don't give them any more.
I want to bring up something.
Brett, what do you got?
Yeah, so, Doug, myself and Joan, and then many others too, Charlotte was there. We went and did, the tour of the Freeman diversion in Fair County on Santa Clarita River. And we actually visited the Freeman diversion on the river, and it was very educational for us. I thought we learned a lot. And it kind of got me thinking, well, okay, we're doing all of this, for groundwater management and to recharge our aquifer, but if we had something like the Freeman diversion on the Santa Ynez River, what would that look like? And so I think there's an interest to kind of go explore that, where we could put it, could we leverage the design that already exists that was done with Freeman in 1990, put that at a strategic point on the river, or maybe we need to look at a small version of that, a couple of different points on the river. And what I always look at is, what would be the threat that was kind of driving? Yes, we've had 7 years of drought. We know how important it is to recharge our aquifer. But I'd also look at the fact that they do get the benefit of, stormwater and flooding management by the way in which they utilize that resource. And if we had something like that, we could guard against what the county has on their map, the 100-year flood or 500-year flood event, and prevent, loss of life and property damage here in the valley by having another resource to help manage when we get that, severe storm event like we saw a couple of years ago. There was also an ask by them to come visit us. So I don't know if the GSA is going to take the lead on that, the parent, or if all the agencies are going to work together.
What
to
are
do
we
that.
gonna show them?
Well, we can show them the river, and we can show them the winery and feed them. But, I think there was an interest in reciprocating since they
Sure.
took a lot of time to sit down and, educate us. So that's it. I think this should be a future agenda item. I'm not sure where it fits in the priorities. I know we're working to, as the navigation analogy, a series of waypoints to get this done. And I don't want to distract from that, but I think we also want to look at, from a strategic standpoint, maybe there's some things that we should be doing with California Consulting or others to go investigate what state grants are available, what federal grants are available, and what we could do to build a coalition here in the valley to better manage our water and take advantage of stormwater so that it goes back into the aquifer instead of the Pacific Ocean. So
Yeah.
there's my comment.
And-
If you want to add to that, since you're in there, go for it.
The Santa Clara River is a big river and it's a major infrastructure project. I wonder if for the Santa Ynez, there would be something that's a softer kind of technology that wouldn't require so much cement, so much alteration with the river. In theory, I like the idea that somehow you capture the extra water and get it recharged, divert it. But if you have to, reconfigure the river to do it with so much hardscape, it'll be a hard sell, I think.
Oh, my God. I'm thinking steelhead running into.
Well, That's one benefit of the version that they have. They can actually count the steelhead that they got. So they've done a good job of not just getting infrastructure in place, but then enhancing it and then creating more stakeholders that buy into it because they see the benefits of it, whether it's, you know, from
No,
a fish standpoint or, you know,
I can appreciate it.
or seawater intrusion. That was another thing that they showed us, you know, where that was a significant problem because they had the extra water. They could push that back into the ocean and mitigate that problem as well to their groundwater. So there was a lot of good things that they're doing with it. It's just,
But
you know,
what's the
getting started was gonna be the hardest part.
What was the bottom line cost? How many billion
Well-
was this?
Well, some of it was paid.
In millions, but.
I think it's in the billions from I.
I know they've got some big projects in front of them, but
It's,
I think the other piece to it is not just with floodwater, but as they explained to us, they're buying a lot of state water and Colorado River water during rain events and other times where they can buy water at such, you know, wherever that lower rate is during rainfall. And then they're diverting it, you know, into the basin over a longer period of time, which I don't know enough about.
yeah, if you know, Pine Flat, they're doing it over around like Kings River.
Right.
They got something going there. And, you know, they got some nice orchards out there. They can, sandy soils where that water can go and it hurts real easy. Yeah, I don't want to be a doubting Thomas here, but I've been dealing with steelhead for 8 years here. And I know our Kachuma Lake, 90% goes over the mountain, people. 90% is earmarked to go there. So, yeah. And so, you know, and they come in and I get hammered about, we're ruining steelhead. I go, no, 90% of the waters there, you took 90% of the steelhead habitat. That's what ruined the frickin' river there, you know, for steelhead. So, and then when I hear people in South County complaining that we want to use a little more river water, it just kind of like blows my mind. Wait a minute, you took it all. And so that's a big issue. I'm sorry. That's
Okay, well,
you know my point here. I'm trying to keep the water in our valley. Yeah, but if we can divert, I'm open to stuff. We were grappling over a few bucks per acre feet. So, but anyway.
Charge basis, time and material.
Yeah,
Chair.
Reading construction.
The May 22nd at 5 o'clock, and I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Bill, because, I mean, there are some stormwater components of the Prop 68 grant. They're not specific to the EMA, but I think they are still doing some, they've had some conversations with some EMA member agencies. So those components are being evaluated, and I think they're a little, I think they're softer, as you described, they're a little, yes, not as much infrastructure in river. But still looking at similar opportunities to capture wet water when it's here, slow it down, percolate it, and so that it gets into the basement in the future. So we can bring that type of information back.
Yeah, I'm not sure that really on our list of projects that we put in our plan, but I think there's tremendous interest in that.
Yeah,
we got some hurdles. Thought we did have it in the plan, right, Bill?
It's group 3.
It is, okay.
Yeah, so there are a number
Oh,
of
wow.
projects in the plan that look, they're great recharge opportunities with locals.
Right, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Doug Circle for setting that up too, because that was phenomenal.
And they were such great folks.
Yeah, they do.
Very good. Sound like that's good people. Okay. Anything else? Good order?
Okay.
Thank you.